Quentin Tarantino recently said on a podcast that MCU actors are not movie stars. And I think he's wrong. Let's talk about why. Hey guys, I'm Karl. Welcome to my movie film show. Feel free to subscribe down below if you would like to. But today, we're here to talk about Quentin Tarantino and what he recently had to say about the MCU. Now, if you've been on my channel before, you've seen this beautiful face before, you will know, perhaps, that I'm not a big MCU fan anymore. I was at one point. I went to see every movie. I watched all the TV shows when they started coming out, like WandaVision and Loki. But slowly, like a lot of people, I started getting bored with it. To the point now where I don't cover MCU on the channel whatsoever. The last movie I checked out was Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and I was massively disappointed by it. So I'm not going to cover MCU anymore, and I haven't even watched anything that's come out from Marvel ever since. But you can't escape MCU when you're talking about movies. And recently there's been some controversy because Quentin Tarantino, as I previously mentioned, has been talking about how MCU actors are not movie stars. He mentioned it on a podcast with Tom Segura. I think it was like last week, maybe the week before.
You love these movies, these Marvel movies.
I don't love them. No, I don't.
And it got some traction online, even to the point where Simu Liu, who plays Shang-Chi, got a little bit angry about it. And we'll talk about that later on. And Quentin Tarantino on this podcast talked about how he does like Marvel stuff. He used to read the comics. He has no gripe against them other than Hollywood only seeming to favor MCU movies right now.
My only axe to grind against them is they're the only things that seem to be made. And they're the only things that seem to generate any kind of excitement.
His main point was that these MCU movies don't generate stars like movies used to. People go to see a Captain America movie to see Captain America, not see Chris Evans. They go to see Thor, not necessarily Chris Hemsworth. He's saying that the heroes are the stars, not the movie stars. Like back in the day, people would go to see a Robert De Niro movie, regardless of what it was. The example he used in the podcast was Sandra Bullock in Speed.
Sandra Bullock is in Speed.
Right.
All right. And everyone thought she was amazing in it. All right. She was charming as hell. Everyone fell in love with her. And so, even she does a couple of mediocre movies after that, The Net and something else. Okay. Well, people went to see it because they were
like
excited by Sandra Bullock. They want to see her in something else.
And his point was that these movies made the stars, whereas MCU movies don't necessarily do that. The heroes are interchangeable. And that's something I was kind of expecting from the MCU going forward, that at some point, we're going to get a new Iron Man. I previously mentioned, you could easily see someone like Tom Cruise become Iron Man someday. And it's an interesting point from Tarantino. I think it does have some merit, but overall, I think he's wrong. Because I think back to before the MCU started, would I have gone to see a Chris Evans movie before then? Probably not, because he was making a lot of crap. Would I go see a Chris Hemsworth movie before Thor? Well, I didn't know who he was. He was in Star Trek, and I remember when I went to see Star Trek years ago in a movie theater up in Dublin, when I was leaving the movie theater, people were talking, saying, that guy's going to be playing Thor, the guy from the start of the movie. And I was like, who? Thor is what I know Chris Hemsworth for. Would I go to see a movie because it's a Chris Hemsworth movie? After Spiderhead, probably not. But I'd argue that a lot of the movie stars from the MCU movies, especially phase 1 and phase 2, they made a lot of stars. They made a lot of household names. I don't think Chris Hemsworth was as well known before it. I don't think Chris Evans was even as known before it. Despite him doing stuff like Fantastic Four and not another teen movie. Even Robert Downey Jr. had some career revitalization after Iron Man. You could argue the likes of Samuel L. Jackson, of course, and Scarlett Johansson were already huge stars. So the movies didn't make those stars, but they certainly have made some actors more notable. Another actor who I'd never heard of before was Simu Liu. Simu Liu. Apologies if I got his name wrong. I'm terrible with names. But he plays Shang-Chi. And Shang-Chi, in my opinion, in the last couple of years was one of the better MCU movies. And I'd never heard of Simu before that. So you could argue that that movie made him a movie star. At least a mainstream movie star. Simu Liu hit out at Tarantino's comments on Twitter in hopefully what isn't going to be a terrible case of career suicide, because it could easily be. Because at the end of the day, movie studios don't necessarily want to work with actors who can be controversial and create controversies for them in the future, which can lose them cash. Although they do say controversy creates cash. Simu took to Twitter and said, if the only gatekeepers to movie stardom came from Tarantino and Scorsese, I would never have had the opportunity to lead a $400 million plus movie. I'm in awe of their filmmaking genius. They're transcendent auteurs, but they don't get to point their nose at me or anyone. He further went on to say, no movie studio is or ever will be perfect, but I'm proud to work with one that has made sustained efforts to improve diversity on screen by creating heroes that empower and inspire people of all communities everywhere. I loved the golden age too, but it was white as hell. That last part in particular might be the part that, is frowned upon in Hollywood. They don't like you calling him out on shit. I think a couple of journalists have taken that as him taking a dig at Tarantino, saying his movies weren't diverse. I don't think that's true. The weird thing is with Simu's comments towards Tarantino is that Tarantino never said these are awful movies, these shouldn't be made, or these aren't cinema, like Scorsese said. He was making the point that he doesn't believe the movies make movie stars, which, as I was mentioning, I don't believe is true, because a lot of the names we now know from the MCU became household names because of the MCU, like Chris Hemsworth, like Simu himself. Although time will tell whether that's true or not, because what these actors do beyond the MCU determines if they're actually movie stars or just playing the characters. You know, Chris Hemsworth hasn't had many major roles outside the MCU. He was fantastic in Rush. That was a fantastic movie. Other than that, I can't think of too many phenomenal Chris Hemsworth movies off the top of my head. Same with Chris Evans. I can't think of a phenomenal Chris Evans movie off the top of my head that isn't an MCU movie. Same with Simu Liu. I don't know any movie he's been in other than Shang-Chi. Maybe that's my own ignorance though. But to refer to Quentin Tarantino as a gatekeeper of Hollywood who wouldn't have someone like Simu Liu lead one of his movies seems kind of strange, considering some of the movies Tarantino has made in the past which have quite diverse casts. And of course, he mentions Martin Scorsese.
I'm Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese's comments are the ones that really got people riled up when he said MCU movies are not cinema. I think people have just misunderstood that comment, because more and more people are turning away from the MCU because they're getting bored of the cookie cutter movies. The MCU is quickly becoming the fast food of the movie industry. Sure, it's quick, it's easy, it's cheap, and it's easy to consume, but you know it's not good for you. Now, there's been some phenomenal MCU movies down the years. There's been some phenomenal cinematography in some of the MCU movies, some phenomenal effect shots, and some phenomenal storylines. The more they drag it out, and the more they reach into the depths of superheroes to drag out these superheroes you've never heard of, and they tell the same story time and time again, the more it weakens the MCU. And you do get a lot of the same type of story. There's clearly a plan for each movie. Now, a lot of movies follow a path, and you can see that throughout movies. You can time when things are going to happen. You can see the people that have read Save the Cat. Every movie has an all is lost moment. That's more or less Scorsese's point with saying that they're not cinema, is that they're all generic. They don't take a lot of thought, they don't take a lot of filmmaking to make these movies. And I think the key thing with this is also related to Tarantino's point, because the reason people know who Martin Scorsese is, and the reason people know who Quentin Tarantino is because these are some of the best filmmakers of all time. They've made some phenomenal original movies with phenomenal shots, phenomenal storytelling, acting, directing, lighting. These men have become top of their field because they were phenomenal filmmakers, phenomenal directors. You can name a load of filmmakers down the years who have become famous because they made phenomenal movies. I don't think too many people can tell me who directed Black Widow, or who directed Shang-Chi, or who directed Iron Man 3. Perhaps it's not the movie stars that aren't being made by the MCU. It's the filmmakers who aren't being made by the MCU. There's so many of the MCU movies you can look back on, and you see these random people who are just pulled out of film festivals and given an MCU movie. They don't have many creds to their name, and they make pretty poor MCU movies. I recently made a video not too long ago referring to an article I read, I think it was in Variety, maybe it was the Hollywood Reporter, somewhere like that, with an effects editor who worked on an MCU movie, who pointed out the MCU are constantly hiring these directors who have no idea of how to work with visual effects. And there's so many MCU projects that are just handed out to people. Now, I'm sure these people have worked very hard to learn filmmaking, and they've probably made some good amateur movies, but the MCU doesn't need big name directors to come in and make phenomenal movies. The odd time when they have gone with a big name director or big-ish name director, they generally have got pretty good movies. You know, the Russo brothers came in, made some phenomenal stuff for them. Jon Favreau's made some great work for them. We won't talk about Joss Whedon. There was a time when these MCU movies felt big. Now they come out every couple of weeks, couple of months. There's been effects editors coming out of the woodwork and talking about the pressures that's on them to get the work done. Not necessarily to get the work done well, just to get it done. And that was evident in the most recent Thor movies, which while I haven't seen it, I have seen some of the terrible effect shots within it. The MCU more and more don't seem to care about making good movies. They just care about making a movie that's going to make money. And MCU movies make money, whether you love them or hate them. But more and more people are turning away from the MCU. And it is because, like Scorsese says, they're not trying to make cinema, they're just trying to make a movie. There'll never be a Citizen Kane in the MCU world. But don't get me wrong, there is some very good MCU movies. In my opinion, Infinity War is phenomenal. I remember when Infinity War ended, I sat there in stunned silence at what I'd seen, eager for the next movie to come out. Endgame eventually came, and It was a little underwhelmed, if I'm honest. That's another story for another day. But while these comments from Martin Scorsese and Tarantino seem to have pissed people off, they do hold some merit. Like I mentioned, I do think Tarantino was wrong that the movies don't make movie stars, but time will tell with that one. But I would agree that it doesn't make stars within the entire movie industry. I can't think of any big name director that has come from the MCU. Someone's going to say Taika Waititi, aren't they? And Tarantino's only gripe, as he mentioned in multiple podcasts, he even mentioned it on Howard Stern recently, his only gripe with the MCU is that's the only thing Hollywood seems to want to make nowadays. And that's very evident because there's not too many movies this year in 2022 which have come out, which have been independent, non-reboot, non-remake, non-superhero movies, which have been outstanding. Couple here and there, but I'd love to hear your opinions on this. Do you think the MCU has made movie stars? Do you think Tarantino was wrong? Do you think he's right? Let me know all about it in the comments section below. And if this is your first time here on my little YouTube channel, all about movies, I'd greatly appreciate it if you jump down below the video, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to check out more videos, there's two right over here to check out.